especially since all of this started in Eastern Europe and the Ukraine, have really been, it just brought so much back to us. I wanted, before we start the study, I wanted to share with you a little bit. Ed is doing well. He is healing. He had to go back a couple of weeks ago because the rods in his left arm weren't holding, so they had to adjust those, and they actually put a plate in. And so he's doing much better. He's up, moving around, and actually he's got more movement than what I was anticipating. He's healing well, so keep him in prayer, and we're doing good. We both are just so blessed. I wanted to share just a little bit about many years ago, Ed and I, some of you know our story, some of you don't, but shortly after we became believers, God led us to Europe through an organization called Luther the Mission. And we had a 5-month-old daughter, Jennifer, at the time, and we said yes. We said yes. And wow, what an adventure he led us on. And it was the foundation of our Christian walk. And when I think back now, and that if we had not said yes, oh, what we would have missed. What we would have missed. And we ended up in Switzerland at a school of evangelism. So we spent 3 months there, and then we went on this 3-month tour with 50 other believers in a van, in a bus, and with a food van and another car. And we spent 3 months traveling all over. We basically went through Paul's journeys backwards, and then we went into into Russia and Czechoslovakia. All of it was communist at the time. And we camped in a tent. So it was a glorified pup tent that we spent 3 months living in with a 7-month-old baby. Very interesting, but God was so faithful. She was the only child. The rest of them, they were young couples, and we were all young. So there's 53 of us in this van, and we went into the Soviet Union. We went to Ukraine, which was still part of the Soviet Union at the time. And I remember how interesting it was because we also had a Ford Bronco, and very unusual. There was no cars like that there. And everybody would just stare, and they would come and say, no, you in America, you have bread lines. You are, they had pictures of the Depression, and that was their impression in the Soviet Union of what America was like. And we're like, no, and we're showing them pictures, and they're just dumbfounded. Well, we ended up in Kyiv, and it was one of the cities that we visited, and I remember it being in the middle of this beautiful city was a campground. It was this forest, and it was so pretty. It was one of the nicer places we stayed. And what we would do is we would go, we had left Odessa, and thank you, Jen. We left Odessa, and we were there in Kiev, and we had, what they would do is they followed us very closely. We had a Russian guide that was with us, and we spent the whole 5 days we were there just witnessing to her. We took turns, poor girl. And she was a real sweet. She was very polite, and we just shared the Lord with her and told her about what we were doing and why we were there. And we got a chance to go to a church on a Sunday morning in Kyiv. It was called Church of St. John the Theologian. It's one of the largest, oldest churches. It was a state-run church. And so Sunday morning we showed up there, and I've got she was about 7 months by then, very chatty little baby. And so everybody was being very closely watched in the state churches. There were state churches and there were underground churches. And so we kind of stuck out. I mean, there was 50 of us from all different countries. And so we showed up there on a Sunday morning, and I remember looking around and watching, and when they read a scripture, everybody was busy writing on little tiny scraps of paper. And I'm like, okay, she's writing, and now she's writing. What they were doing was they were writing down verses, and then they'd get outside, and they would exchange those verses so they would get a whole section of scripture, because no one had a Bible. Now, when we went into the Soviet Union, it took us 5 hours at the border. They went through everything. They put the bus up on this thing so they could look underneath with mirrors and lights, and to make sure we weren't smuggling anything, they allowed us each our own personal Bible. Well, that day at that church, and so people were looking at her, and it was causing a little disturbance. So I decided to go outside. And so I stood outside in the courtyard, and I was immediately surrounded with these Christian women. And they were all so just excited to meet us and to see us there. And I remember one lady was concerned because it was spring and it was cool in the morning, and so she was worried about Jennifer. So she had a heavy cotton shirt that she was using kind of as a jacket, and she took it off and she wrapped it around my baby's shoulders. And then she took the scarf off her head and she put it on my baby. And I was like, oh, no, I don't need it. And then God just said, let her do this. Just let her give. And so I did. And I remember that. We ended up going to Poland after that, and I gave the shirt, to a woman there who looked like she needed it, but I kept the scarf. And I kept it for Jennifer, and I still have it. And then everyone else came outside, and we were so touched by what was happening inside that we all gave our Bibles away. And to this day, I will never forget standing, and the woman that I gave my Bible to fell to her knees, sobbing and clutching that Bible to her chest. It was in English. I don't know if she could read it or not, but it was a Bible. And they were so blessed to have it. And we walked away going, we don't know anything about sacrifice. We know nothing about sacrifice. There is a strong body of believers in the Ukraine. They're there, and they're praying for us. And I remember them saying that. We went back later, a couple years later. Jennifer was 3 at the time, and we went in, and it was just us. We were in this singing group. And we went into Czechoslovakia, and we also went into Hungary. But while we were there, when we came into the city, we did have stuff then. We had things that we were bringing into the church there. They were books that we were translating, and so it was kind of a different situation. We actually had I don't know if any of you remember Brother Andrew, but he did a lot of smuggling, and they had vehicles that had fake places you could hide Bibles and get in and hide things. And so we were taking in books that were being translated, and the translations were being checked for accuracy, and we had letters and things that the Christians were sharing back and forth with family members, and this is the only way they could do it. And so we came across the border at about, it was late in the evening, about 10 o'clock at night, and we had always been told that if you had anything in particular that you didn't want found, put it, the women carried it through, because they would search the guys, but usually they didn't search the women. Well, I'm sitting there, and I'm right behind the driver in this van, and Max was driving, and Jennifer is sleeping in the back. Now, she's in a little sleeping bag on top of a whole bunch of Bibles and books. Everything that we had that we were bringing in is underneath my daughter in the back of this van. And I had some letters, and I'm watching the cars ahead as we wait to go through. And the car in front of us had some gypsy girls in it, and they unloaded the car and took them inside. And then about 20 minutes later, they brought the girls back out, and they're all in hysterics. They're all in hysterics because of the way they've been searched. And I'm like, Max, maybe you better take this stuff, because it looks like I'm going to be brought inside. Well, when our car pulled up, they looked at us and they said, go over there. And it was behind the building in the dark. So we drove back there, and there was no lights, and very little light. And I'm sitting there, we're all sitting there, and they came to the driver's side, and they opened the door, and the guy leaned in to kind of search inside, and he had a machine gun over his shoulder. And the strap of the gun fell forward, and the gun came right here. And I'm sitting there looking down the barrel of a machine gun in the dark at a border into Czechoslovakia going, this is an adventure. And then, and he pulled his rifle back, and then they went on, and they went around to the back. And the woman that was kind of, she was in charge of this particular search. Did any of you see the movie, The Hiding Place?
Yeah.
Do you remember one of the German guards. She had short blonde hair, and she was big and tough and scary. That's who came out. And she was scary, and she was gruff, and she was businesslike, and she was, she comes around to the back of the bus, the van, and we open the top, and she starts patting around back there. She didn't know that Jennifer was back there. And she touched her, and Jen moved, and she squealed like a girl. You know, it scared her. And it so flustered her in front of all these other guards that she got mad and flustered and slammed the back of the door down and said, "Get out of here." We got through everything. Nothing got touched. God was so faithful, so faithful. So, I'm just telling these stories because it actually ties in. Then part of that journey, we went into this town after we got through, and they met us on the outskirts of town, and they put us in different cars at night. They said, "Come in at night, undercover." And they took the van and they hid it. And I don't know where they put it, they didn't tell us. And they took us all to different homes, and we stayed with different people. And then in the evening, we went to an underground church to sing. And again, it was one of these moments. Jennifer was old enough then, and she sang this little song, "Jesus is coming, coming for me." I don't know if you've ever heard it before. It's just a little song. And she sang it, and you could just feel the spirit in this place. We're in a basement, and there probably was just jammed with believers. And I stood up to sing, and I started singing "Blessed Assurance," and I didn't get very far because I looked out at these people that were taking their lives in their hands to be there. This was a time when they were being beaten and killed and imprisoned for coming to church, and especially an underground church. And I just choked up in the middle of it when I got to the chorus. "This is my story, this is my song." 40 years later, it still gets me. It was one of those amazing moments in my life. They all stood up, and they began singing in their language the song with me. And we all stood there singing, "This is my story, this is my song," praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story. And I will never forget that. It is one of the foundational truths in my life where I recognize God is faithful, no matter what, in any situation. And if I had not said yes, if I had not said, "I will go wherever you take me," I would not have experienced that. And I firmly believe that I would not have gone through cancer, and Ed and I would not have gone through what we've gone through in the last 2 years, as well as we did, had we not had those foundational experiences and trusted God in the most crazy situations, the most dangerous situations, and known that He would carry us through. Years later, come forward 30 years, closer to 40. Ed has been asked to go to Istanbul, Turkey, and to share and speak with some Iranian Christians, along with some other people from that area, other pastors. They were allowed to go into Istanbul because it's kind of like it's like Las Vegas, kind of a thing. So under cover of going in to party, these pastors were coming into the city in order to baptize, because it was so dangerous to do it in Iran that they were going in and they were killing these little pools, and they were baptizing up on the rooftops of the hotels. So Ed is there, and then they were being taught. And so these pastors have come in, and they're having this 2 or 3 days of this seminar for these pastors. Well, while they were there, they were having lunch, and they were all in this big room. They were serving them lunch, and Ed is sitting there, and he's sitting across from a young guy. And as they began talking and conversing, he recognizes that this is not an Iranian young man. He's from someplace else. He says, "Where are you from?" He said, "Oh, I'm from, the Czech Republic, that area." And it says, "Really?" And so they get to talking, and he tells him, he says, "I've been there before. I've been to your city." And he's like, "You have? Tell me about this." And he said, "Well, many, many years ago, I came with my wife and 4 other guys, and we we came with the singing group. We had the translator with us, and it was just us. And the kid is looking at me and he goes, "It's you." And it says, "What do you mean it's me?" And he said, "My grandfather told me about you. He told us that many years ago, a group of young Christians came from America, and they came to our church, and they sang at our church. It was you. All those years later, God brought this young man from the Czech Republic. I'm not going to say the name of the city, and brought him all the way to Istanbul, brought my husband all the way from the United States, sat them across the table from each other to say, see what I can do? See what I can do if you just say yes." That leads us to Esther. She said yes. She said yes. Prayer. I love this chapter 5, where Esther takes the plunge. I love it because it shows us about prayer. It is the most powerful tool that we possess as believers, but we don't use it very often like we should. We have access to the throne of grace. We enjoy this ability and this privilege to come to Him, call Him Abba Father, crawl into His lap, and share with Him our needs. It's a privilege that we all too often don't take enough advantage of. So these were troubling times there in the Persian Empire for Mordecai, for Esther, and the whole Jewish population. It's not good. Haman has influenced Ahasuerus to sign this decree that calls for the complete destruction of the Jews. I had mentioned when I did the introduction that there were several times in history where Satan had devised this plan. If he could destroy the Jews, the Messiah wouldn't come. But God was working during this time in the background. Remember that story? That during that 400 years, God was working. God's working here. So Mordecai and Esther know they have to act. They have to do something, because if they don't, it'll result in the death of every Jew. And they believe God had brought Esther to this position for such a time as this. I love that, for such a time as this. So here she is. So in the first verse, it says, "Now it happened on the third day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace across from the king's house, while the king sat on his royal throne in the royal house facing the entrance of the house." So she stands in the inner court. That's a place that no one's supposed to go, not unless they're invited. And we're not really told how long she stood there, but can you imagine what was going through her mind at that point? Is this going to be life or death for her? So we see her at this point. She has begun this intercession for her people, and she has taken it to the throne room of Ahasuerus. She had made these preparations. She had entered her intercession and was going to the king on behalf of her people. So here is this intercession, and it's beautiful. You know, as we are part of this royal priesthood, and we have access to the throne, as I said earlier. And here she is. She has access. But for her, it was a little different than it is for us. We have free access. This encounter is very interesting. She was faithful. She has been persistent. She has gone through these 3 days. Those 3 days it talks about, that he said, let's fast and pray for 3 days. And she'd been faithful to do that. She knew the importance of praying and fasting prior to entering the king's presence. She knew she needed the help of the Lord, and she would not have dreamed of entering that throne room apart from that prayer and fasting. This is a challenge for me, and it should be for all of us, I think. I think that sometimes, I know in my own life I've become too casual and complacent. I know that I can run in there and jump on his lap. I also know that I can bring anything to him, but sometimes I love this because it talks about the concept of preparing in prayer and fasting and praying, and I want to get back to that. Years ago, and I'd love to do this again. If anybody gets it gets it on their heart to do this, what we used to do was once a month we would take prayer requests. Prayer requests from here, from people we knew in the body, it didn't matter where they came from. But somebody would take all these prayer requests and write them down on the list. And then they took a calendar And we had several girls that volunteered to fast and pray. And so each one would take a day. Okay, I'm going to take the 1st, I'm going to take the 15th, I'm going to be someplace where I can do this on the 3rd, and they would they would fill in the calendar from the first day to the last day. And then they would give them these prayer lists, these requests. And so every day someone was fasting and praying for that need. We saw so many wonderful things happen, and I just would love to do that again. I think of what's going on in the Ukraine, and I'm thinking, I'm praying, but I would love to be fasting and praying because I know that something happens, something special happens when we do this. So here it is. I want to get back to that. So if anybody gets it, on their heart to do this, I would love to do that again. I think it's amazing, and we saw some beautiful things happen through that. So she is prepared. She has been fasting and praying, and now on the 3rd day she puts on her royal apparel and she stands in the inner court of the king's house. And over against the king's house, she was right there. She made these preparations to enter. She made sure that she was adorned in royal apparel. Now, this isn't talking about wearing your best clothing when you're at church. It's talking about being able to stand before the Lord and leaving all of the stuff, the garments that are stained with the world and the sin and all of that, and leave that outside and be clothed in purity before Him. I love that idea of saying, Lord, confessing my sins and coming before Him with a pure heart to bring my supplications to Him. And so Esther stood in the inner court over against the king's house, and I think this is interesting. Some might just go, well, they were just trying to explain where she was, but I think it's really significant. She entered this palace and she went right to the throne room. She knew she needed to meet with the king, and she wasn't going to waste time with others. She stood in the presence of the king. And sometimes, many times, we seek counsel and advice from a lot of other people before we even take it to the Lord. We want to see how the world does it, or what the latest fad is about how to deal with this situation. Some people that we go to because we trust them spiritually, how would they handle this situation? There's nothing wrong with seeking godly counsel, but it should not precede our time in prayer. I think we take it to God first because He alone can meet the needs. And if we take it directly to Him and then seek counsel, I think that's the better way to do it, and that's exactly what Esther did. She went to the Lord, and then she went directly to the king here. So it was when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court that she found favor in his sight, and the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther went near and touched the top of the scepter. She would live. At least for the moment, she would live. She came into that place as bold as a lioness, I heard somebody say. She didn't cringe, she didn't cower. She stands confident in the Lord. When He saw her, He welcomed her, and He held out the golden scepter to her. So she approached and touched it. Now, the possibility of being put to death if you came into the presence of the king unannounced was very simple. That was it. Either she lived or died when she went in there. She did it. She said, yes, I'm going in there, and I'm going to trust God. God puts something in front of you, trust Him and go through it. Do it. Because for me, as I look back on, years later, I took both my daughters into China and we smuggled about 500 Bibles between the three of us. And I left poor Ed here in California, and I went to Japan and we did some music there. And then I took my daughters and I said, yes, I did it. I have to say that partway on the plane on the way over, when Satan started talking to me like, you little dirty sinner, what makes you think you can do something like this? You're so sinful and you tainted these Bibles. They're going to find you and they're going to imprison you. And I'm like, you're right. I'm going to crawl into the seat. But I couldn't fit, and I had to go. But I'm so glad that I did. I'm so glad that I did. Because amazing things happened, and I will never forget how God moved there in China. We got all the Bibles in. And so she received, and now she's before the king. And she stood there and trusted God that she was there for such a time as this. So we can approach the throne of grace, can't we? We can walk right in, and Hebrews 4:16 says, let us therefore come boldly into the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need. We are the church. We are the bride of Christ. We are his daughters. We can call him Daddy, Abba, Father. To show her acceptance, he held out a scepter. She drew near and touched the top of it. By touching the top of the scepter, she recognized his authority, and she showed gratitude for being granted an audience with him. She was careful to honor the king before she made the request. So often in prayer, we just bring our list to him right off the bat, don't we? Can you do this? Can you do that? Can you do that? And he's gracious, and he receives that. But shouldn't we be showing him honor and respect and praising him for who he is as God first? I think so. That's what she did. We are undeserving of any of his grace, and we are blessed beyond measure to be able to walk in there. And we do time and time again. I lost count of the times that I just go right to him. I don't acknowledge anything other than, God help me. And that's okay. But I think that we need to try to spend that time in worship, honoring him prior to making the requests. Were it not for that mercy and grace, for him bearing our sins, for dying on the cross and giving that redemption to us, we wouldn't have that kind of access. We should always be mindful of that and thanking him and praising him for who he is and taking those few minutes to just say, you are so awesome, you are so good, and recounting the things. That's what Ed and I have been doing lately, is recounting the miracles in our life. The story goes on what he did. And someday I'll tell you little bits and pieces of what happened during those trips behind the Iron Curtain and how God moved even on my 3-year-old. He moved on her and used her in these amazing circumstances. And we've just been spending time thanking him for all that he has done in our lives. So anyway, the king comes in, he says, what do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request? It should be given to you up to half my kingdom. So this beautiful woman is standing regally before the king, and she took his breath away. What do you want? Up to half my kingdom. Proverbs 21 verse 1 says, the king's heart is in the hand of the Lord, like the rivers of water. He turns it wherever he wishes. So he has set Esther's mind at ease quickly, promising to grant her request. She's gained favor. And there she is with confidence. He hears us when we pray. He hears us and he sees us. And he looks at us with the same kind of favor. You are beautiful. You're my daughter. I love every part of you. I love who you are. You are unique to me. You are special to me. No one else is the same as you. You are my favorite. And I love that God can do that. That when we come before him, we are his favorite. I'm his favorite. Sorry, girls, I'm his favorite. But you're his favorite too. And so are you. And so all of us are his favorite because nobody is like you. You hold a unique place in his heart that no one else can take. You are his favorite. I love that. I love that. God is in control here. God is in control. He's working behind the scenes, in the shadows, in ways that we don't see. But if we open our eyes and we wait, we see it. And it's just always such a blessing. Isn't it a blessing when you find out about something that you said or you shared, and then it comes back to you, that it ministered to someone? That's such a blessing. He's always working, and he's always controlling the circumstances. I heard somebody say that we all have an Ahasuerus in our life, a King Xerxes, someone who totally intimidates us, maybe someone in authority over us, like a boss or a professor that you're afraid to even speak to them. We all have at some point in time come up against somebody like that. But no one is unreachable. No one is unreachable. Stephen, there's a good example. He was brought before the Jewish Sanhedrin and he preached the gospel. And he probably reasoned to himself, if I just share, one of these guys might come to the Lord. But then he was martyred in the prime of his youth, and how tragic that seems. What a waste, some people would say. But there was a man listening to Stephen that day, a man that seemed to be in charge. And after Stephen was stoned, he went on this rampage and he was hunting down Christians. His name was Saul of Tarsus. You know the rest of the story, that was Paul. And God used that incident to change his life. While I was going through the cancer, and I'm going to run over a little bit here, I haven't got the first floor. there was a young woman, and she went by the name of Nightbird. And I don't know if any of you know who she is. She got cancer at a very young age. She just recently passed away. She didn't make it, but she got as far as going on TV, and she was on America's Got Talent. And God used that moment with this young girl to touch the lives of hundreds of thousands. I mean, I would read some of the things that she wrote. She was a writer, and she was very gifted, and she talks about her walking through all of the pain and the cancer, and God used her in spectacular ways through her cancer. Now she passed away, and now she's with the Lord, but in the process, oh my gosh, some of the things she wrote this thing called God is on the Bathroom Floor. If you get a chance, Google it, Google Nightbird, God is on the Bathroom Floor, and read it. It's just one of the things she wrote, and they're all absolutely beautiful, absolutely beautiful. So God uses even these bad situations, the death of this young girl, the death of Stephen, to move on Saul, who became Paul. And no one is out of God's reach. No king, no queen, no prime minister, no president has ever intimidated God. Isn't that awesome? No husband, no parent, no boss, no child for that matter, no one. Proverbs 21 says, verse 1, the king's heart is like a stream of water directed by the Lord. He guides it wherever he pleases. I love that. So Esther answers, if it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today for a banquet that I have prepared them. So she's planning this banquet, and she's going to bring the king and Haman. So maybe at this point she's not quite, figured out exactly how this is going to work. But she's trusting the Lord, and she's waiting. And I love that. She's got patience. She's waiting. And anytime we are in that situation where he is asking us to wait, and we always know that the enemy is accusing us, but God stands as our mediator. He's always there and standing in our defense. The king says, bring Haman quickly that he may do as Esther has said. So the king and Haman went to the banquet that Esther had prepared. So he's excited, and so is Haman. And so she still doesn't mention it. She wants to win the king's confidence, I think. She also wants it to be exactly the setup to be perfect. So he honors the queen's request and commands Haman to appear. And as we will see, she uses this initial banquet as an invitation for another banquet. Now that seems interesting to me, and yet there was things going on that she was not aware of at the moment. There was no hesitation regarding the request, so he summons Haman to come, and at the banquet of wine, the king said to Esther, what is your petition, and shall be granted you? What is your request? Up to half my kingdom. A second time he says this, name it, it's yours. And he has ensured that her petition will be granted. He's told you, I will do anything, up to half my kingdom. He's pretty impressed with this young woman, and that was God. That was God. So we face this determined adversary. She was facing Haman. He is present. He's right there in the middle of it. She knows he's already been trying to poison her husband, the king. And we have a determined adversary, don't we? And he's trying to defeat us any way he can. But he is aware also of the provision that we have in Christ, just like Haman was aware that Esther had the king's ear. But he still tries to defeat us. But isn't it comforting to know that we have the ear of the king? We have the eye of the king. We have the heart of the king. We are his, and he is completely for us. Esther answers and said, my petition and request is this, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, then let the king and Haman come to a banquet, which I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king said. So she reveals that she wants to do yet another one the following day. And so that's good. She's had this audience, and yet she asked for another banquet. She could have done it then. Haman was there, but she has asked for another one. She felt the need, and she went with it. So God is doing this thing, which we'll find out about in the next chapter, that was elevating Mordecai. And so this all had to happen. God was working behind the scenes yet again. So many times I don't understand his plan. When Ed got in this accident, I don't understand it. I don't understand, because we were just being so excited about how he was finally getting there and getting better, and then boom, he gets in an accident and then almost kills him. And yet, even though I didn't understand it, I didn't question it. It's not because I'm some amazing, but I've been in enough circumstances and situations with him now to know that he's always doing something. He does not waste one opportunity to work in somebody's life in some way. And so he's working. Yeah, he's working here. So a lot of times we don't have it, but we would do well to be patient. Seek the Lord and look for what he wants to do in that circumstance. Neither Ed or I said, why not? We said, what do you want to do in this situation? How do you want to move? What do you want us to learn in this? What do you want others to learn? How are you going to use this to be glorified? Praise him for the blessings you receive in the situations, even if you don't understand them. Trust him in those times of uncertainty and doubt. Again, go to him in prayer. It is the most powerful thing that we have. The most powerful asset is to go back to the Lord. And that's really all he's looking for, is for us to come to him. He just wants us to be open and honest with him about the needs in our life. So she says, tomorrow I will do as the king has said. So she's postponing, and God was working. She was maybe sensing the time wasn't right, that there was something that God wanted to do. Don't rush it. Let the Holy Spirit do the work that he's doing in that person, in that situation, in that life. I'm going to just skip a little bit of this and move on because we're running out of time. So Solomon wrote, there is a time for every activity under heaven, a time to be quiet and a time to speak. That's in Ecclesiastes 3:1-7. This was the time for her to be quiet and to wait. And we'll see why in a few verses. So she's wise. She's not in a hurry. And she waits for the right time. So Haman went out that day, joyful with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, and that he did not stand or tremble before him, he was filled with indignation against Mordecai. His triumph, he is so excited, it's only him and the king and the queen. Wow, this is great. Everything is coming together the way I want it to. The queen has invited only me along, so she's obviously not even aware of any of this going on. So he's as happy as he can be. And so, isn't it interesting how we see in some people they actually take delight in the sufferings? He was so happy that his plan was going to come to fruition and all these people were going to be slaughtered. To see those plans of treachery, we see that in people, and it always is like, wow, really? This brings you joy? That's what happens in the wicked heart when you allow yourself to become that type of person. So he's excited. He's going to be number 2 in the kingdom. So there's this private banquet coming up. But now he sees Mordecai and he just gets furious. His bubble is burst. There's no respect. This guy doesn't respect me. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home, and he sent and called for his friends and his wife Zeresh. He sent and called for his friends and his wife. He was looking for support from those that held the same idea as he did. So he told them of his great riches, the multitude of his children, all the ways in which the king had promoted him, and how he had advanced him above all the officials and servants. So he's like, this is who I am. Moreover, he said, besides, Queen Esther invited me, and no one but me, to come in with the king to the banquet that she has prepared, and tomorrow I am again invited by her along with the king. He's just bragging away, isn't he? Queen Esther invited no one, so he's got all these personal connections, and he feels so powerful and rich. Yet all this avails me nothing, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. So all of these things that he had been given, that one situation was just grating on him. He was the pebble in his shoe. Have you ever had a rock in your shoe and you can't take it out? I remember one year at one of our retreats, that was what our teacher had said to do. She said, I want you to take a little bitty rock and I want to put it in your shoe. Put it in your shoe and wear it all afternoon. And then come back and tell me what God showed you in that. That one tiny little thing can just destroy everything. He was unhappy with all of it because of this one situation, This one little thing was bringing him down. And his wife and all his friends said to him, "Let a gallows be made, 50 cubits high, and in the morning suggest to the king that Mordecai be hanged on it. Then go merrily with the king to banquet." And the thing pleased Haman, so he had the gallows made. So his wife and his friends talk about this huge gallows they want him to make. Even his wife was on the same page. He loved the idea and he puts it into motion because he's absolutely convinced that he's going to win in this situation. But God is at work. He is not absent. He's not napping. He sees everything. He sees what's going on in the world right now. Do you think any of this surprised him? What's happening now in the Ukraine and the Soviet Union? No. None of it surprises him. None of it. Man has his will, but God has his way. Esther asked the people of God to fast and pray, and they were doing so. The Lord was working behind the scenes. God is working in your life behind the scenes. No matter how crazy it seems, no matter how bad it seems, he's working. Look for what he is doing. Look for it. No matter how bad it seems, there's always something good in it. Always. Always. So look for it because God is working in your life and my life. He's working in the lives of the Christians and the believers in the Ukraine. He's doing the work there. I will never forget them saying, "Are you praying for us? Because we're praying for you." They're praying for us. Let's pray for them also, that God will continue to save them and that his will be done here and there and on into eternity. Let's pray. Father, thank you. Thank you for this beautiful woman and the example she sets for us to be brave and say yes and to do it, to just allow you to use us in whatever way you see fit. And the blessings that come to us in the midst of that. Lord, if you can take us across borders and get us into communist countries with Bibles and smuggle us in and out of there and keep us safe, you are able to do the small things that are in my life now. You can do